This is a Faith Matters in Maine update with Carroll Conley of the Christian Civic League.
Welcome to Faith Matters in Maine, and I just want to let folks know, as usual, to go to our website, cclmaine.org. That's the Christian Civic League, cclmaine.org. And you're going to see two banners at the top of our website. First of all, you are going to see the Pews to the Poll banner. And Pews to the Poll is what funds our voter guides, our 501c3 voter guides, as we get ready for this election cycle. And you cannot call and ask us who to vote for, but we can certainly allow you to view our voter guides and see where the candidates stand on issues that matter to you. And so your donations help us fund that. Also, just recently up on our website, you will see the Christians Engaged banner. And that's the opportunity for you to make a pledge to vote and to pray. And we'll send you reminders as the time comes so that you can be a positive influence and be a steward with the freedoms that we have to vote in these upcoming elections. So again, that's Pews to the Poll and then also Christians Engaged. We have a really special guest with us. It's Boz Tchividjian. Boz is the founder of Grace, which is a godly response against abuse in a church environment. And Boz is here on our radio program this morning because there is a very important event coming up in Augusta, August 21st and 22nd at Penny Memorial regarding child abuse or abuse in general in the church. So, Boz, we appreciate you joining us on Faith Matters in Maine.
Carroll, it's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to my first visit ever to the state of Maine.
Well, I wish I'd known sooner that you were going to be here. Catherine Wilson, who is a treasure here in the state and has done so much in raising awareness to this problem in the church, reached out to me to let me know about this very, very important conference. It's going to be here again, August 21st and 22nd. And I have a board meeting that day. But one of the things I love to do, I love showing people that are up here the beautiful estate that we have up here. So I know your grandfather, Billy Graham, had come to Maine several times.
He did, as well as many other places.
Yes,
absolutely.
For sure. I don't know if there's any place Billy Graham didn't go. But
I think you're right.
Boss, we just mentioned that you are the founder of Grace. You're no longer the executive director, but you actually founded it. So how does somebody this practicing law wind up, especially in this niche, specifically in regard to abuse, sexual abuse in the church environment?
Yeah, it's a great question, Carroll. I grew up in the Christian home. I grew up in evangelicalism. My grandfather was Billy Graham, who I tremendously to this day miss and will always admire to the last days. But, I grew up with good experience in church. I grew up believing that the church community was a safe place, was a refuge. And that drastically shifted when I became a prosecutor in Central Florida back in the early 90s. And I ultimately became the division chief of the sexual crimes unit here. And I was in charge of prosecuting thousands of cases. And one of the things that bothered me so much as a young prosecutor and as a Christian was how many of my cases were connected in some way, shape, or form to the church or a Christian school. And I just remembered, and I would sit in the offices with these victims, mostly coming from Christian families whose lives had been decimated, families had been betrayed. Many of these people never wanted to step inside a church again. And I remember walking out going, that's not the way it should be. The church should be the place where survivors are protected and that the people who are abused and vulnerable are running towards, not running away from. So long story short, in 2004, I got connected with a number of other individuals who were all experts in their field and all Christians and all had the same burden. How do we transform the church to better understand abuse, not only child sexual abuse, even adult abuse, and not only understand it, but how do they prevent it? And then how do they respond in ways that reflect Jesus? How do they respond in ways that draw people back to them and not in ways that propel victims away from them? And so we started Grace. Then it's I could speak all day about Grace. We don't have much time, but it's an organization that trains and equips churches and faith communities on how to minimize abuse within their environments, and then how to properly respond when abuse disclosures are made so that maybe we can better reflect Jesus when it comes to this dreadful issue that is so prevalent in our culture today.
And Boz, as I think about being a headmaster myself for years in Christian schools, and unfortunately having to deal with this. I mean, I became a building principal because of a situation like this as a very young person. And I think, back in the 80s, I think we were very naive. I think there was a combination, and maybe address this as a prosecutor. I think there was a certain naivete. And then I think because of authoritarian structures of sometimes good intention, some bad intention, that we have when these issues would come to our attention, that we didn't deal with them. Not only did we not prevent them because of our naivete, but I think we had they were propelled and happened again and again because they weren't dealt with even after the failure in prevention. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, what people need to understand is that this is really prevalent. I mean, the most conservative statistics say 1 in 4 females and 1 in 6 males will be sexually victimized before their 18th birthday. If you have a church of 100 people, that's 20 people in your congregation who have been sexually victimized as children. Now, you may only know about 2 or 3 of them, right, but they're in your pews, and that means we have to confront this. And the way we confront it all too often is with this dreadful combination that I call arrogance plus ignorance equals danger. It's an ignorance of the issue, and it's an arrogance of thinking we know enough about how to deal with this. We don't need to ask the experts on how to best deal with that. And as a result, what you just described, you create cultures that ultimately protect institutions, and where victims are usually ignored, oftentimes vilified, and more often than not, leave the church and never to walk back inside the church. And sadly, I don't blame them, because the church is a place of trauma for them instead of a place of great healing and hope.
If you just joined us, we're talking to Boz Tchividjian,
Got it.
I get it. And the founder of Grace, a godly response against abuse in the church environment. And again, we want you to know that on August 21st and 22nd, down at Penny Memorial, down in Augusta, there's going to be a great conference, and Catherine Wilson, who does a super job. And if you want information about this conference, by the way, it's free. It's a 2-day conference with coffee, snacks, lunch, both of those. It's stoptraffickingus.org. Stoptraffickingus.org. That's the 21st and the 22nd. And Boz is going to be one of the speakers. And as he said, it's going to be his first trip to Maine. So it'll be great to have him up here. But Boz, when we deal with these situations in as far as the abuse situation, we were talking off air before we started. Obviously, there's a legal component that's inescapable now, and because of insurance companies and things like that. I mean, if you're going to be working in the nursery, if you're going to be working with the young people, I think in some ways the church has been forced to do some of that. But what about culturally? I mean, how do we, beyond the legal obligation, the ethical, frankly, the scriptural obligation, to make sure that there's not a millstone hung around our necks as leaders?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, my current practice now, Carroll, is exclusively representing victims of sexual abuse, primarily bringing legal cases against churches and organizations that have profoundly failed them legally. But when I talk to churches, they say, what can we do to avoid lawsuits? I say, that's the wrong question. The right question is, how do we best reflect Jesus in our church culture as it relates to this issue? The law shouldn't be the driving force of change. It should be our faith. And our faith says that the very DNA of our church, the very DNA of our Christian community, should be to protect children and protect vulnerable people. That should be who we are. I mean, if you look at the life of Jesus, he was always moving towards the outcast. He was always moving towards the sick, the vulnerable. That's who we have to emulate. And so that takes time. And that's why organizations like Grace are wonderful, because churches can bring them in and they begin to train and equip not just leaders, but the entire congregation on this issue. And they work with them in developing policies and procedures, but not just policies and procedures that you can put up on your shelf and say, we've got great child protection policies and procedures, but policies and procedures that actually get applied in their culture, that again become part of the very DNA of that place. And that begins with understanding and recognizing that every church in this country has so much more to learn on this issue. And you have to remain humble and you have to remain teachable. And I like you just said, I want to encourage those in Maine to come to this conference. There should not be a church in Maine that does not send at least one, if not more folks to this conference, because it's going to be a wealth of helpful information, and it's free because Catherine is so committed to trying to make Maine a safer place for kids.
Hey, I'm looking at the agenda. It's jam packed. I mean, it starts at 8 o'clock in the morning, goes to 5 o'clock at night. And I apologize, but I see the director of the Zero Abuse project as well. Is it how does Victor pronounce his last name?
Victor V.
I thought it was Veith. Hey, okay,
Yeah.
so we got both of those down, but
Yeah,
he's going to
awesome.
be there as well. And again, I totally agree with what Boz is saying. We need Christians speaking into the life of Christians, far beyond the legal aspect, which is really should be the baseline of this as well. And I would echo what he said. I've researched Catherine and talked to individuals. Boy, before I have anybody on my radio program, I research them, and as I did with you, Bob, as well. And I'll tell you, Catherine really is a treasure in this state, and she has the right attitude. She's not against the church. She's in the church. Like you, she wants to see the church thrive. She wants the church to be that lighthouse, that safe place for our children. And as you mentioned, it's just not children as well when we have power differentials going on with pastoral abuse and things like that. But I just want to echo, folks, seriously, we just had over 500 people show up at our conference with Erwin Lutzer and Frank Turek, and it was fantastic. And I thought, how are we going to get people out in the summertime? And we did the last week. I want to say, I have no authority here in this situation, but I want to speak to those of you listening. I know it's August and we don't get many sunny days, but I would urge you to consider this resource to help you be what God wants you to be, the shepherds and the light in your community. So again, the website is stoptraffickingus.org, stoptraffickingus.org. And it's up to us to keep our kids safe. We want them to come. We don't want to repel them. And again, that's August 21st, 22nd at Penny Memorial down there in Augusta on Water Street. If you're going down West Avenue, it's just across. We've got about 45 seconds, Boz. I'm going to give you just a little bit of time to make a similar plea for our folks to be there.
Yeah, I want to see how many, I want to meet as many people from Maine as possible. What are you calling Mainlanders?
Maniacs.
Maniacs. Okay, I want to meet as many maniacs. And I'm from Florida. We got a lot of maniacs, but not that type of maniac. But I'm just looking forward to seeing, because that gives me hope. When I walk into a place and it's packed with people from churches wanting to learn this issue, it gives me tremendous hope, because I've been on the front lines of this issue, and there have been many hopeless days. Yeah. And I can't wait to be there and look forward to meeting everybody.
All right, folks. Again, it's stoptraffickingus.org. Come meet Boz and Victor and Catherine, and let's get our churches with the culture that's going to protect our children. Thanks again for tuning into Faith Matters Maine, and we'll talk to you again next week.
To contact the Christian Civic League, call 622-7634 or go online to cclmaine.org.